Is everyone ready?
Yeah, I thought so.
A quick off-time note, we'll be using HSR instead of high-speed rail.
Okay, that's right, yeah. I just saw it.
Senate and I affirmed the resolution. The United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in high-speed rail. Our sole contention is regional development. Federal support is critical for HSR. Mullich 19 finds it takes 4 years of permitting and 5 for construction. If the government gets involved, we accelerate it down to 1 year. Discount 21 notes that with HSR, the public sector will come back and break inertia, beginning a national network. Hence, HSRs would catalyze a financial revolution in 3 ways. First is megaregions. Apta 22 writes, the U.S. population is projected to grow by 100 million, creating megaregions that will not prosper unless they can be free from congestion. At the same time, the U.S. can't build enough highways or airports to meet demand. HSR is key. Fruit 21 writes, in megaregions, people would rather be in smaller cities but work in larger city that's 30 minutes away by train but 3 hours away by car, a Goldilocks zone where HSR would fit between other forms of transportation. Thus, Fleet 22 finds that high-speed rails can meet the demand for better travel. As Rhoda 09 concludes, HSR is the most convenient way to travel across America. Ross 11 analyzes that in 2050, 80% of GDP will be generated in megaregions. Apta 22 finalizes that every $1 invested creates $4 in economic benefits. For economic success, adequate transportation infrastructure is imperative. Second is manufacturing. In construction, Wagridge 22 finds there is a labor surplus of unemployed workers with experience in their industry. Voting affirmative solves. ASBN 20 writes HSR would create 11 million jobs over 10 years and an entire manufacturing industry, including thousands of specialty companies, depending on the amount of investment. Overall, Wade 21 explains the development of an HSR system could support local manufacturing. Critically, Kristen 21 found that the manufacturing industry was the vital sector that boomed production to emerge from the 2000s and Great Recession. Holistically, Proco 9 writes, HSR would fuel our economy through any recessions of the next 50 years through new manufacturing operations. Egon 2022 specifies, traditionally we would already be in a recession, however, inflationary factors keep us afloat. And that's key, as in the last recession, Boston University 13 finds that the crisis spread beyond the US borders with 100 million people falling into extreme poverty. We need high-speed rail to stabilize our economy and mitigate any risk of recession. Third is supply chains. Day in 22 reports that because of our supply chain's design, rising prices have exacerbated the situation. Thankfully, HSRs solve. As Watson 18 explains, freight using HSRs will be cheaper. HSRs can replace cargo flights as shipping airports get more congested and delays increase. HSRs are more reliable and will reduce congestion at airports. Bernard 14 furthers that HSR substantially reduces travel time, allowing firms to efficiently search locations for quality suppliers. Thus, Jill 21 writes, dispatching goods by trail is more efficient. Crucially, Wade 21 explains HSRs have important spillover effects in supporting an extensive supply chain. Todorowicz 21 furthers that HSRs can divert passenger rail, freeing up conventional rail for freight. Overall, I-21 writes, intermodal transportation can reduce costs, revolutionizing the industry, allowing prosperity and new jobs. Malo and Lawrence 20 quantifies, high-speed rail would create up to 1.16 million jobs annually. Active 20 scales that every $1 billion in investment, 24,000 jobs are created. Past evidence agrees. Lawrence 20 specifies that proposed HSR lines in Cascadia would bring 200,000 skilled jobs to the region, with the potential for another 840,000 jobs in the region itself. In fact, HSRA 22 reports that the Midwest HSR corridor could have created nearly 130,000 permanent jobs from just the same economic growth of new railways. To preserve American economic prosperity, we proudly affirm.
Can I ask you 2 pieces of evidence? It's both Wade 21s. First is on your link to manufacturing, and second one's on supply chain. Thank you. Or wait.
Okay, I'm just going to stand up. I'm too tall.
What are you you. Ready?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Daniel, Garepis-Holland. I'm the first speaker for Palo Alto. We're going to negate the resolved. The United States federal government should significantly increase investment in high-speed rail. Assuming everyone can hear me, I'm talking at a good volume, and everyone's ready, I'm now going to begin my 4-minute speech. Palo Alto negates. To begin, 2 observations. First, Republican states will reject the money for high-speed rail, so substantial investment will lead to nothing. Jeff A13 finds the Obama administration had grand plans for a national high-speed rail network, but Republican governors spoiled hopes of such a system by rejecting federal money for routes throughout their states. Even if the money is received, airlines will fight to divert the high-speed rail away from the most profitable routes. Conley 21 finds that Texas's attempts to build a 200-mile-per-hour line between Dallas and Houston have been smashed by aggressive attacks and lobbying by Southwest Airlines. Because high-speed rail is an existential threat to the airlines, so whenever a project gains momentum, they pour billions of dollars into lobbyists, propaganda, and paid politicians to stop it. First, our contention 1 is agriculture. We currently need to produce a lot more food. The Silva 12 finds that by 2050 we'll need to produce 50% more food to feed a world population of 9.3 billion people. But high-speed rail impedes this in 3 ways. First is through increasing urban sprawl. High-speed rail will accelerate urbanization, which will lead to farmland being developed into housing. The good thing is, sprawl is currently decreasing due to the natural speed limitations of cars. Chung 14 finds the rate of suburban sprawl has declined by 2/3 since the 1980s, but high-speed rail reverses this trend. Feng J18 confirms that high-speed rail can drive the development of urbanization because high-speed rail stations serve as transportation hubs that rapidly urbanize the surrounding area. They found that on average the rate of urban expansion in cities with high-speed rail was 13% faster than in cities without it. Therefore, urban areas will expand faster into the countryside and build on farmland. The second way high-speed rail disrupts agriculture is because the tracks and stations themselves will take up farmland. Hung Zhao 11 finds that according to official statistics, the Beijing to Shanghai high-speed rail took 500,000 hectares of land. The third reason it would disrupt agriculture is because it would be a pull factory leading to cropland abandonment, where farmers abandon their crops in search of better jobs. Duarge 22 examined China's high-speed rail and found that Chinese high-speed rail projects led to a 20.6% increase in the area of cropland abandonment, where farmers leave their lands, because it resulted in a pull effect, where rural labor force shifted to non-agricultural sectors in the local region. And any increase in abandonment will be devastating, as the USTR in 2019 found that US farmers export more than 20% of what they produce, and even 500,000 hectares of land, according to Nakoni 22, is enough to feed 1/3 of Yemen's entire population, just to put things in context. And any decrease in food production is magnified by current conditions. UN 22 finds that because of the global food crisis due to the war in Ukraine, climate shocks, and the COVID-19 pandemic, more people are on the brink of starvation than ever before. And PBS 21 found that apparently 2.3 billion people are on the brink of starvation. Our second contention is the economy. The US is on track to narrowly avoid a recession right now. Martin 22 finds the US economy is likely to slow, but will narrowly avoid a recession as the Federal Reserve implements its rate tightening plan to curb inflation. The US actually has a manufacturing and construction labor shortage right now. From a month ago, NAM 22 finds the manufacturing industry had 2.6 million job openings nationally in 2022. And ABC 22 finds the construction industry needs to attract nearly 650,000 additional workers on top of the normal pace of hiring to meet the demand for labor. Estelle 21 finds the market can address labor shortages if Washington will let it. Wages will automatically adjust based on supply and demand, but unfortunately, national high-speed rail would make this problem worse and out of the market's control by creating 11 million new jobs. ASBN 20 finds high-speed rail would create 11 million new jobs, and another surge in labor shortage would cause even more inflation. Dubay 22 finds the worker shortage fuels inflation. To improve employee retention, the cost of payroll goes up to maintain profitability, and businesses pass along the higher labor costs to their customers, which increases inflation. Government spending itself also makes inflation worse. Quai 22 finds the current link between government spending and inflation is actually stronger than previously predicted. The 2022 inflation spike followed 2 major federal spending programs under 2 administrations. Increasing inflation by 1% increases the percentage of low-income households by 7% because this is massive. Adding billions of dollars and thousands of new jobs increases demand without increasing supply, overheating the economy and pushing us into recession. And Bradford 13 quantifies a recent study by the IMF warned that as many as 900 million people could fall back into poverty in the event of an economic shock like the Great Recession. And for these reasons, we negate.
Kai.
Kai.
And then
Which one do you want to see?
the 2 infrastructure bills cause it
Yes.
directly. Can we get the hectares land in China?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
In China? Okay.
Yeah.
So Quai 22, I got that. And then you want the China hectare, okay, China 500,000 hectares. Okay, no problem. All right, run to email chain. Thank you for doing reply all. Okay, here's the Kwai 22, and then there's the China one. Okay, they should both be sent. Alright, are you ready for crosswise now?
For sure.
Alright, I'm just going to sit up at my desk. So thank you.
Yeah.
Alright.
Alright. So, may I have the first question?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Alright. So on agriculture, how much have we seen food production decrease in China?
Yeah, sure. So we can see that food production decreased. I'm not sure exactly how much food production decreased, but again, there's other factors in this equation. Like China's a rapidly industrializing nation, so I can't quantify exactly how much food, the total food changed, but if it increased, it was likely because of other factors, just because China's growing and expanding and rapidly urbanizing, so they have more mechanized agriculture, etc. So even if food exports increase, you can't really say that's because of the high-speed rail or not because of the high-speed rail. But may I have a question?
Sure.
So in your third contention about supply chains, you say that freight is going to use high-speed rail. But my question is, in the United States, is high-speed rail actually allowed to carry freight?
So if we take a look at freight using, because there's two warrants for like this freight and HSR. First is that essentially like on HSR, freight's gonna like divert passenger rail. So like you have HSR, you have conventional rail. With HSR implemented, it's going to divert passenger rail from conventional rail, and that's going to cause increased space for freight and conventional rail. But then on HSR with freight, so if we look at other countries that have HSR, like China, France, Germany, like they all use freight within their HSR. I don't think there is a question of whether or not like there's allowed to be freight on HSR. It can be used for both passenger rail and freight rail.
So, but my question is, you say that it's going to free up space, right? Do we really have that much passenger rail in the US that we can kind of free up?
Insofar as it's going to take passengers away from normal rail, from regular rail, and move it to like HSR, there is going to be space freed up.
Well, I understand that in Europe, right, it frees up space from passenger rail, but in the US, we don't really have that much passenger rail, right? So
That
how much space is really going to free up?
That honestly doesn't matter, because insofar as there's going to be space cleared up, there's going to be a difference. But may I have a question?
Right, sure, of course.
Okay, so on agriculture, again, so California has been like building HSR in the Central Valley. What have we seen about like cropland abandonment there?
Yeah, so cropland abandonment comes after the high-speed rail is constructed, right? So we have three main links, right? One of them is cropland abandonment, which is basically once the high-speed rail is built, it leads to farmers seeking other job opportunities using the high-speed rail, which leads to them abandoning the cropland. That's just one of the links. The other links we talk about are about the high-speed rail specifically building through the land. California hasn't like built that much, so we can't really see exactly what the impacts are, but we'll likely see them in the future if we can look at what happened in other countries.
Okay, sure.
All right, may I have one final question?
Sure.
Yeah, so on your regional development contention, right? So wouldn't you agree that if we're creating these mega regions, that's going to expand into farmland?
So I would argue, first of all, that HSR is not going to like cause a decrease in food, like in food exports and stuff like that. Mega regions are going to be created around like where HSR is.
But doesn't that mean that?
Not HSR. But what we're saying is that like populations are going to increase, and there's going to be like mega regions around urban areas. However, people are going to prefer to live in smaller cities away from these urban areas, just because like the cost of living is super high within urban areas, so it makes more sense.
That's cross. Thank you.
Are you guys gonna run it back?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah, showing back now. Oh wait, really quick. Could we get the card for Republican states where we're drawing money for HSR?
Sure.
Yeah. I can send that.
Okay.
Prop 9 part is 50 years, right?
Yeah, 50 years.
It's 50 years recession?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Alright, brief off time, I'm gonna be starting with, I'm just gonna be going straight down their case and like going through it. Alright. Is everyone ready? Judge, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright. Let's start off at the top for their overview. They tell you that Republican states will reject money for HSR. There are some key issues with this. First, the topic is if we should substantially invest in HSR, not whether it can actually pass. So the debate is about the idea of whether we should invest more in HSR, not about the fact like the Republicans will actually like pass it or not. But second, I would argue that Biden already passed the regular infrastructure bill, which has so many aspects on green innovations that Republicans did not agree with, yet it still passed. So clearly, HSR can also pass. Also, their evidence is from 2013. It's outdated. There's no like proof that Republicans would not pass it now. But then let's move on to their first contention about agriculture. Remember, we would argue that HSR actually reduced barriers in China. As Zoo21 writes, that the opening of China's HSR shows that HSR can promote export growth of agriculture-related enterprises by 6.9%, and it will reach 10% in 5 years. What this means is that HSR reduces information barriers and costs for enterprises to enter the international market by providing transportation convenience and improving market access levels. Prefer our empiric over theirs, as our evidence analyzed long-term data over 5 years. But then remember, they talk about how like China, they're like hectares, but remember, hectares are not the same as farmland. In fact, they give these hypotheticals that HSR would hurt farmers and food, but in China itself, we've seen zero impact of this happening, even though they've built HSR. In fact, Reform22 finds that China is one of the top 5 countries that has shown the most improvement in food security over the past 10 years. Insofar as that is true, HSR has no impact like they talk about except a positive one. But in Cross, they literally conceded that urbanization helps agriculture, as he responded by saying China is rapidly urbanizing, which increases food through like new advances in technology, and the fact HSR itself is shown to increase innovation. But then, remember, we would argue that HSR increases food exports and availability, as in Dawi21 find that HSR reduces the information barriers. But then we would argue specific to the America, their entire point is not specific, as America would do things differently. Anyway, as America knows it's integral to the global supply chain, and therefore when building rail, it prioritizes farm workers. Lynn examines how the California Rail Authority is actually building basins to replenish groundwater, benefiting farms in the long run. And all of this is solved by more funding, as only funding allows equitable trade-offs for taking over land, such as more tools, resources, and proportional compensations. Now, let's look at their second contention about debt. First, we would argue that the impact for debt has not mattered because we're already in $30 trillion of debt, and Biden just last year passed multiple major bills, as well as a $10 trillion COVID relief bill, and we've seen no impact that they talk about. But second, we would argue that jobs are actually a prerequisite for debt. As US HSR 22 explains, that for every $1 billion invested in government spending, 10,000 jobs are created. And even right now, CA22 finds that the HSR California project has created over 7,300 labor jobs with $13.7 billion in economic output. So funding for HSR would help the economy. But then, they come up here and say that there's a worker shortage right now, which means that there's more workers and less jobs. But realize people in the US are literally being laid off. Look at ZipRecruiter, there are tons of open jobs right now. But then prefer our evidence, YGRS22, which tells you that in transportation and construction, there is a labor surplus. There are more unemployed workers with experience in their respective industry than there are open jobs. So insofar as they concede ASPN 20, which tells you that 11 million jobs will open up, these surplus of workers will be able to work, which increases economic productivity. But then, remember, we tell you that HSR costs are manageable in the first place through one, standardization. As Y21 details, there are many ways to reduce the cost, one of which is standardizing designs and procedures. Thus, he concludes, China's HSR is 2/3 the cost in other countries. But second, private funding. As Lane explains that reliable federal commitments is needed to inspire confidence among the private sector. That's key, as leveraging public investment with private capital makes large projects much more feasible without the need for the government to provide 100% of the funding, so debt wouldn't increase as much. But then finally, Brosnan 20 tells you that HSR would create $355 billion in economic growth and over 200,000 new jobs in construction for only a $24 billion upfront investment. That's a return on investment of over 1,400%. For those reasons, HSR is clearly better for not only agriculture, but also for the economy. It's a clear act-out.
Can I just see Wagner's 20?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Alright, well, yeah, we'll see that.
Scott. Time starts now. Brianna's 42 seconds. I'm gonna start I'll start by defending our case. I'm sorry, let me go over. I'll start by defending our case, and then I'll move on to responding to their case. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Time starts now. When evaluating this round, Judge, you must ask yourself two questions. First, whether or not the high-speed rail will actually be built, but then secondly, even if it is built, whether it will produce any tangible benefits. Start on the first question. We read you two reasons why the high-speed rail will never be built. We tell you first off that the Republican states will reject the funding. They tell you that, we're debating whether or not the federal government should increase its investment. But we're telling you that if you spend $3 trillion and it just gets rejected, why would we spend $3 trillion and waste it that will plunge into recession? The next thing they tell you is that Biden passed his infrastructure bill and thus that's applicable. No, it's not. We give you evidence specifically about high-speed rail empirically. The infrastructure bill was not brand new tech. The high-speed rail will be. That's why it'll uniquely be destroyed. But then secondly, they missed the second reason why a high-speed rail will never be built, which is lobbying. We give you examples from the past where airlines completely shut down high-speed rail construction because it's detrimental to their business model. This means that even if we do substantially increase our investment, it'll just be wasted, which means none of the benefits that they talk about will ever materialize. Let's go on to the second question. On our first contention about agriculture, the first thing they tell you is that we're going to increase export roads. No, it won't, because all the high-speed rail is going to do is run through farmlands without stopping there, which means they get all of the harms and none of the benefits. Exports won't increase. The next thing they tell you is that hectares aren't farmland. Sure, but if insofar as the United States is majority farmland in the middle of the United States, in order to get from place to place, you have to run through farmland. That's just logically true. Third, again, they tell you that China increases exports, but remember what Daniel tells you in Cross, that that's because they're rapidly industrializing. It has nothing to do with the high-speed rail. Then they tell you that America is going to do it differently and funding is going to solve. No, increasing funding does not create new farmland. That doesn't make any sense. And moreover, they don't properly respond to the last link we read you, that the high-speed rail has an explicit pull factor, which led to a 20.6% increase in cropland abandonment. And as far as there's 2.3 billion people on the brink of starvation, any decrease in food production from the United States will be extremely devastating. On our second contention about the economy, they first tell you that debt doesn't matter. Our argument isn't about debt. Next, they tell you that jobs are a prereq, and again, they tout their entire case about how many jobs are created. They cite this Wagridge 22 card, which is from July. We give you evidence from a month later, which shows you that there's 2.6 million more jobs than people in the manufacturing industry and 650,000 more jobs than people in the construction industry. This means that even if you want to build a high-speed rail, you can't because we physically don't have the people. But then remember the back half of our analysis, which tells you that in order to attract the workers, you're going to have to pay them very high wages, which then leads to inflation, and is how you get a recession. With that being said, let's go to their case. The first argument on regional development. Let's start on their first argument on mega regions. A couple responses. First, it assumes that the high-speed rail will be ridden by the poor. It's not true. A trip from LA to SF is $150 on a high-speed rail, which is more than a plane. It won't be used by everyday workers. But then secondly, their entire argument concedes our urbanization argument, as they are literally advocating for more urbanization, which then leads into cropland abandonment, which then is a global issue, which is why you should prioritize it. On their next argument about manufacturing, remember from our case that right now there's 2.6 million
million more jobs than people in the manufacturing industry explicitly, which means that, again, you're not going to be revitalizing this manufacturing industry insofar it's way beyond max capacity. But then secondly, we tell you that artificial competition, what they're advocating for, is actually bad for manufacturing. Lincecum 21 explains that if we want to see U.S. Steel investing and innovating again, the best thing we can do is let competition do its thing. All this artificial competition does is just harm it in the long run. But then they read you this Wait 21 card a couple times in the case, which is from greenbiz.com. We tell you that's not a valid source, don't evaluate it. On their next response about freight, remember what Daniel tells you in Cross. Because of safety regulations, freight physically can't run in the United States. O'Toole confirms this. And moreover, we already have a very expansive freight network that is far longer than what the high-speed rail will be, which means the high-speed rail won't actually be able to solve for much. Then, on their argument that their high-speed rail is going to magically solve future recessions, two responses. First, logically, it doesn't make sense. Insofar as we're at 2.6 million more jobs than people in the manufacturing industry, we're already at full employment, we should already be solving for these recessions. But then secondly, realize that all of their benefits are short-term, because the second high-speed rail stops getting built, we lose all of these benefits, people are left out hung and dry. This is why we're strongly urged a negative ballot. Thank you. Ready for Cross.
Alright, just before that, can we get like 2 cards?
Of course.
Both on freight, can we get a tool, and then can we get that HSR just cannot solve for freight because of how the United States historically?
I said distance.
Yeah.
Feels like. Okay, I'll send you all that.
And then can I also just see your, like, we're in a worker, like, shortage right now?
Yeah, sure.
That's NAM
From
22.
the month, like that.
From Case. NAM 22.
The one that you said, like, is a month afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, I sent everything. You ready for Cross?
Yeah.
You want to stay up here? Or do you want to stay?
I mean, it's, yeah.
Perfect.
Alright. Let me know when
I'm ready. Would you like the first question?
Sure. So let's talk about your entire agriculture, right?
Say that one more time.
Let's talk about your entire point about agriculture.
Yes.
So if it was true that HSR really hurts agriculture and farmland, why have we seen that China's only been improving its agriculture exports and
Sure.
food security over the past 10 years?
Sure.
that HSR has been built?
So your partner asked this question in First Cross, and Daniel answered, and I also said it in my speech, that the reason why China has increased their agricultural development is because they're rapidly industrializing, which means that they're just increasing their exports. It has not that like there has high-speed rail led to a decrease in in farmland, but because they're industrializing, that makes up for it. That's not the same case in the United States. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, so you read me a response that like Republican states, or on a response that Republican states are going to reject it. You say that we're debating whether or not like we should increase our investment.
Yeah.
So do you not agree that it's imperative whether or not it can actually be built? Isn't that a key component to this question?
No, because the argument is about the idea of whether HSR should be built, not if it's actually going to be built. But anyway, your
No, it's
opinions
the
about HSR,
resolution
like,
is should the federal government substantially increase its investment? If we prove
Yeah,
that
should
investment
it
doesn't
increase
lead to
it?
anything,
should it invest more in it? Should it try to invest more in it?
Yeah.
And we're arguing that yes, it should.
so
That's what the
you would argue that we shouldn't increase our investment if we're just wasting trillions of dollars?
We're not wasting it because even
But
if it
that's
doesn't
what-
get passed, it's not wasting it.
It is because
No,
you'll
it's not. If it
Yes,
doesn't
it
get
is,
passed,
because-
it doesn't get implemented. So the money would not
no,
be wasted.
because you'll start building, you'll start hiring people, you'll waste money. All
That
for
only
no-
happens after it gets passed, though.
No, okay, but you'll start hiring people, and
And
then
the
when it
other-
gets to the Republican states, you're going to reject.
And you miss our other two responsibilities. First of all, like your card about the Republicans, like
I didn't
not
miss
wanting
it.
HSR
Respond.
for 2013.
Sure, but it was an empirical example about high-speed rail. You give me some vague thing about the infrastructure bill, which wasn't
Well,
about high-speed rail because it's all
it doesn't-
old infrastructure.
So you realize that the main reason Republicans don't want high-speed rail is because it's electric and they're in the pockets of foreign lobbyists. But insofar as in the Biden infra bill, green innovation and green tech was passed, that means that Republicans are not as keen to close up HSR when other green innovation has been passed over the last year.
We would love to see evidence on that, and you can have a question.
Okay. Let's talk about your point about manufacturing.
Yes.
Insofar as people are getting like laid off currently,
How
why
many
is there a
people are laid off?
specific like a worker like shortage in the transportation and construction industry?
Sure. So
Your evidence is older than ours, and we would say prefer our evidence because it's more indicative of the current world. But then secondly, your evidence is really ambiguous in saying there's this vague labor surplus in the transportation industry. Our evidence is really explicit in telling you that there's 2.6 million more jobs than people in the manufacturing industry and 650,000 more jobs than people in the construction industry. So even if you want to build the high-speed rail, you can't, and then the only way to build it is going to be to take people from existing jobs, pay them extremely high wages in order to pull them out, which our evidence indicates is one of the key drivers of inflation. So building a high-speed rail is only going to spike inflation, which then will lead to this recession that will plunge millions, if not
But we're
hundreds of
already
millions.
in a recession right now.
We are not in a recession right now. We are absolutely not in a recession right now. That's not true.
Alright.
Can I see evidence that Republicans, the green electric thing that you read?
That the Biden has green innovation.
Yeah. No, that like the only reason why Republicans hate or are opposed to high-speed rail is because it's green. Once you see that, okay, have you said?
Oh yeah, I'm thinking right now.
Okay, perfect.
Alright, I see it.
Perfect. And then we're good for speech whenever.
Okay, that's a problem. Okay, that was 2 minutes.
How much do you guys, are you guys?
We have 20 minutes.
Cool.
Okay, so a brief off-time roadmap. I will be going over my opponent's case and then ours. Alright?
You're starting on there.
Yes, as well.
Thank you.
Let's first talk about how their overview about why HSR won't be passed. It's not valid for a couple of reasons. First, on Republican states, realize that their empiric evidence is from 2013. It's outdated. Even then, look at the Biden infrastructure bill that was recently passed that included green tech and innovations, and it was passed and the Republicans voted on that, so clearly there is no issue here. Their evidence is from 2013. But then on lobbying, the Hill 21 finds that high-speed rail is getting a push from lobbyists, companies, unions, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisles. This clearly isn't an issue. But now let's talk about agriculture. The key thing here is that they don't respond to how California Rail Authority is actively building basins to replenish groundwater, benefiting farms in the long run. More funding solves this issue. The resolution provides more funding. And funding only allows equitable trade-offs for taking over land as more tools, resources, and proportional compensations. WACRH 22 is specific to transportation and construction as part of the manufacturing industry. But then on economy, their impact for debt does not matter. We are already $30 trillion of debt. Biden just passed a $10 trillion COVID relief bill. No impacts that they talked about even happened. But then realize that jobs are a prereq for debt. For every $1 billion invested in government spending, 10,000 jobs are created. And even now, California 22 finds that the HSR project has created 7,300 jobs. We're going to be creating 11 million jobs with HSR. This is key. And then realize that there's actually currently a labor surplus in transportation and construction sectors. Specifically, there are more unemployed workers and experience in the respective industry than there are jobs. The HSR solves because it provides jobs in these specific sectors. But then HSR costs are actually manageable. We give you two warrants, standardization and private funding. So this isn't clearly an issue. And then realize that infrastructure spending is good as $1 spent leads to $4 in economic growth. Brosnan 20 tells you that a high-speed rail line would create 335 million metric tons, would create 335 billion in economic growth and 200,000 jobs just in construction. Realize Forbes tells you from 2 days ago that we are in a recession right now. Infrastructure spending like HSR historically takes us out of it. Look at the Great Depression, look at the 2008 recession when Obama historically passed massive trillion-dollar bills. We would argue that in the short term, inflation is actually better and it starts decreasing over time. HSR solves for this. But now on mega regions, realize that HSR actually helps rural areas to get bigger centers faster and connects them. This has been empirically proven. Even then, we would argue there is high interest in ridership for HSR. They then say that HSR is more expensive. That's not true at all. HSR is actually a lot cheaper. A high-speed rail ticket would cost about $75 compared to $200 to fly or drive. But then on manufacturing, think about this logically. We're in a recession. There are more unemployed workers than jobs. That is just a fact. There is no worker shortage happening at all. Their quad talks about something about in 2030. Their argument is about manufacturing in general, where ours is about transportation. There's a distinct worker shortage. We're solving for it in this sector where there is a worker shortage. We're going to solve for the recession. But then on supply chain, HSR cannot solve freight. On HSR, the HSR can't solve freight. But then on impacts, we would argue that these impacts are not temporary. They're actually permanent. If we look at the Midwest HSR corridor, they created 350,000 permanent jobs. Thus, we affirm.
We have 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
Can we see the Forbes evidence that's new that the recession is inevitable or is happening now?
Once we get we'll run prep. No. We'll run prep.
All right, when I get it.
Okay.
Alright, we're waiting on it before prep.
Right, I sent it.
wait, sorry, pausing prep. Can I see that it's $75 compared to $200 for a plane ticket?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let us know when you sent it and we'll resume prep.
Alright, I sent it.
There we go, I'm refreshing right now. And I paused prep at 1 minute and 3 seconds. Okay, time starts. Thank you. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
Alright, that was 1 minute and 41 seconds.
Alright.
So we have, I believe, 37 seconds.
Alright, so I'm going to first talk about our case, then I'm going to talk about their case, and then I'm going to talk about overall why we win the round.
Hold on, wait, time. Just,
Yeah.
No, didn't you trust me? Okay. Alright, that was 5 more
Alright.
seconds.
Alright, can everyone hear me? Am I speaking at a good volume? Is everyone ready for my speech to begin? Alright, again, I'm first going to be talking about our case. So there's one question you have to ask yourself in this round, Judge. Will high-speed rail be built, and will it be built in a timely manner? We talk about how Republicans will reject, they completely mishandle this. The idea is Republicans aren't going to oppose the passage of the bill, it's still going to be passed. But what they're going to do is they're going to do everything in their power to delay and stop the funding from reaching their states. This is crucial, because to have a national network, we need high-speed rail to reach every state. They don't respond to our lobbying, in fact, they admit it. They admit that Republicans get money from oil lobbyists, and therefore they're going to do everything they can, fight tooth and nail to oppose high-speed rail being built, and even if it does get built, it's going to be built in the worst possible place, the lowest ridership corridor, so that it doesn't take money away from airplanes and big oil and big cars. But now, moving on to our first contention about agriculture. Their only evidence against agriculture is saying export growth increased in China. They give no warrant for it. They don't explain to us why it happened. How on earth is more food being produced when cropland is being destroyed? Their card is not linked the growth to exports in high-speed rail. CSIS 20 finds that China's export growth is because they spent large amounts of money improving their agriculture, so of course exports are going to increase. We can see that high-speed would destroy 500,000 hectares of land in the US, and we're not getting that back. Their only other evidence is talking about California high-speed rail benefiting groundwater. This is not quantified. They don't explain how much this actually helps. We can see there'll be a 20.6% increase in cropland abandonment. Farmers would leave their farms, and it would lead to 2.3 billion people being pushed over the brink of starvation. Second of all, on the economy, this is crucial here, because this is fundamentally the worst time to spend on high-speed rail. They claim we're in a recession right now, but they ignore their own article says that the NBER, the organization that defines US business cycles, finds that we're not in a recession in the summer of 2022. They find there's a strong labor market and corporate earnings growth. We are not in a recession right now. But if we pass high-speed rail, we will be pushed into a recession, because we are on the brink of a recession right now. That's what our evidence tells you. Our evidence tells you that we are currently teetering on the brink of a recession, but we're currently going to escape. But if we build high-speed rail, it's going to create new jobs, as they admit. But the problem is there's a labor shortage right now. They tell us there's a labor surplus. This is from a month before. Our evidence, it doesn't actually reflect the reality. It's also in the transportation industry, which is actually truck drivers. We're building high-speed rail, so we're focusing on the manufacturing industry. And in the manufacturing industry, there's a huge shortage of millions of jobs. And in the construction industry, we need 600,000 new jobs. They don't respond to this piece of evidence. So we can clearly see we're pushing us into recession because we're increasing inflation. Government spending and labor shortage directly lead to inflation. Our evidence postdates theirs, so you can say that there's a shortage in the construction and manufacturing industries. This can push 100 million people into poverty. If we're teetering on the brink of recession, if we push over, we're going to push 100 million people into poverty. But now, on their case, they don't actually extend much of this in summary, but we can see they talk about how it would help the rural areas. They have their study about how high-speed rail is cheaper comes from the high-speed rail organization itself. Ours finds that it would be $150 to travel from San Francisco to Los Angeles, which is more than a plane flight. This is not going to help regional development. They don't actually explain why you win, whereas we can clearly show you that we win because we're going into recession. In a recession, regional development is going to be hurt, manufacturing is going to be hurt, and supply chains are going to be broken down. We give you that it's going to hurt 100 million people and push 2.3 billion people into poverty. They don't even explain their impact. They don't even explain why they win. The only thing left they talk about is regional development, and there's no impact there. We don't know why they win, but you know why we win, because we're pushing 203 billion people off the impact reservation and pushing 100 million people into poverty through recession. For these reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative or negative ballot. Thank you.
All right, ready for Grant?
All right, ready for Grant? All right, you guys can have the first question.
We can take it.
Yeah.
Okay, time starts. Do you believe that we should be evaluating the most recent piece of evidence in the round?
No, because yes, but your evidence is talking about the manufacturing industry in general, right?
Yeah.
Our language card is specific to transportation and construction.
Yes, but what exactly are like the jobs in transportation, right? Because transportation is generally the jobs after something gets built, right? So truck drivers, maybe train operators, right? But when we're building high-speed rail, don't we want to focus on the manufacturing industry to make the trains, to make the steel?
The people who make it are the construction workers, who we're saying there's more people there than the jobs available. That's what we're
But
specifically
we also
telling
give
you.
you a car.
Like manufacturing in general is
Okay.
widespread across the US. There's different sectors in manufacturing. We're specifically talking about construction
Our-
where
yes,
there's a
but
shortage.
Our evidence, we also have our ABC 22 evidence that you don't respond to that says
No, read
that,
that.
let me fin- that, okay, the ABC evidence says the construction industry will need to attract nearly 650,000 additional workers on top of the normal pace of hiring. So you can see that there's not enough construction workers.
Our evidence, okay,
No.
you give us this vague idea that there's a surplus without quantifying it or warranting it. We tell you that explicitly there's 2.6 million more jobs and people in manufacturing, and like your surplus could be like surplus could be like 3 people
The
in
problem
the
is
transportation.
The problem is, okay, first of all, like realistically, it's not 3 people.
But
you don't
know.
know.
That's what.
But
we
the
give
problem
you
with your quantification is that it's talking about manufacturing in general. We're specifically telling you that Vigors tells you that in construction and transportation, there are more workers than jobs available.
So
That's specific to
transportation-
construction.
Transportation is not what you think it is. Transportation is a huge sector too. That can be everything from Uber drivers to freight drivers to any type of transportation. That's not specific to high-speed rail either.
But we would argue
Neither of
that
our
it's-
evidences are exactly about high-speed rail.
No,
But
it's
our
not. It's about
evidences
manufacturing.
Our evidences are about manufacturing, which is what we need to do to create the high-speed rail.
No, in
Every part of the
high-speed
high-speed
rail,
rail
we need two
needs
things.
to be
We need
manufactured.
transportation. We need to create high-speed rail. We need 2 things. One, transportation. People can take like things like steel, concrete across like wherever you need to build it. Second, we need construction. That people are actually building
Here, but
the
we
new tracks. People are building
do you
the
have
new
a
rails.
question? We've been on this.
We've been on this. We're going to
All right. So let's talk about this entire thing about recession, right?
Yeah.
So why would an HSR, as long as you concede that infrastructure spending actually can take us out of recession or help the economy, how does HSR differ from any major infrastructure bill that's been passed in the past, like in
Sure.
2008
Okay.
or in the Great Depression?
Okay. A, it's not extended summary. B, we never conceded that. And then C, your analysis from the past isn't indicative of the current job market.
Why?
Again, all infrastructure, all spending in the government isn't the same, right? During COVID, the government spent money because there was very low economic growth, and that's why they had to stimulate the economy. Our evidence indicates that the economy is the inverse right now. It's doing too good, which is why the economy is not doing great. It's doing too good for its own good, and that because of past government spending, like the Biden infrastructure bill, we're on the brink of a
basically,
recession.
we have 2 different arguments. What we're telling you is that we're in a recession right now.
Okay, well, we already responded to that. We said that your own evidence says that we're not in a recession. The NBER says we're not in a recession. That's the national government that determines recession.
All right. We have like what 30. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Should I say that? No.
Alright, so I'm going to be starting off on their contentions, so going over agriculture and debt, and then I'm going to be going on our case. Alright. Is everyone ready? Alright. Let's start on their contention about agriculture. Remember what we tell you. HSR has reduced agriculture barriers in China. For example, Zoo21 writes that the opening of China's HSR shows that HSR can promote export growth of agriculture-related enterprises by 6.9%, and in 5 years, it would reach 10%. They ask why this is important because it's export growth. What it's talking about is in the country itself, it makes it easier to supply food and get it across from one side of the country to the other because HSR makes transportation easier. But then remember, what we tell you, they say we don't explain why HSR helps. We tell you HSR makes food travel faster across the US as it increases food exports and availability. And Dawi21 tells you that HSR reduces information barriers and costs for enterprises to enter the international market by providing transportation convenience and improving market access levels. But then remember specifically, Lynn tells you that in California, they're actively building basins to replenish groundwater, which benefits farms when HSR is being built. We don't need to quantify how it's helping because what we're telling you is that insofar as it's happening, it solves for what they're talking about. On debt, they say we're not in a recession, but HSR would push us through, but they don't respond to how HSR is government spending, which helps the economy. But then realize they're focusing on the manufacturing industry in general. Vigors 22 is specific to transportation and construction. There are literally massive layoffs right now, and ASPN 20 tells you they would create 11 million jobs. Remember, manufacturing is a huge industry, from chips to semiconductors to everything. What we're specifically talking about is transportation and construction, which HSR needs to get from one place to the other. But then remember what Brosnan 20 tells you. It tells you that HSR would create $355 billion in economic growth, which would take away what they're talking about from a recession. But then on mega regions, what we tell you is our argument is simple. The US population is projected to grow, creating mega regions, and at the same time, the US can't build enough highways or airports to meet demand. So HSR is key because it provides the perfect transportation where people can live farther away but still travel to major areas. But also remember, HSR is cheaper. It's a $70 ticket compared to $200 by plane, and HSR also connects rural areas. And on supply chains, remember what we tell you. HSR can divert passenger rail, bring up conventional rail for freight, which is key as dispatching goods by rail is more efficient, and this would increase jobs by 1.16 million and help 50 million people across the world by increasing supply chain and freight, which the US supplies to other countries across the world as well. For those reasons, it's a clear affirmative ballot.
Okay, we have 41 seconds left. Times. Yeah. Okay. I got it. Okay. That was my time. Okay, it's gonna start on those questions in the overview again, and then it'll go to agriculture. It'll go to agriculture. I'll kind of do econ the same because we've kind of gone for the same argument, and then I'll do their two arguments on mega regions and freight, and then I'll just be like explaining our world comparison at the bottom. Is everybody ready? Okay. Okay. Time starts now. Remember the two questions that we've extended in every single speech. First, will the high-speed rail actually be built? We give you two reasons why it won't. First, on that the Republicans will simply reject the funding, and secondly, on lobbying. They give you a couple responses on the Republican thing, but more importantly, they don't give you a single actual response on the lobbying. We tell you explicitly that in the past, there's a historical precedent of lobbying companies completely destroying high-speed rail plans, that if the United States federal government increases its investment, all of that will be wasted money because the lobbying companies will just shut down these projects. Again, you shouldn't affirm because it won't actually get built. The second question is, well, if it does get built, will it produce benefits? We tell you no. We give you two reasons. First, on agriculture. We give you 3 ways why it decreases agriculture. A, that it increases urbanization by 13%, which they themselves concede to in their mega regions contention. But then B, that it takes up 500,000 hectares of physical space, which again they haven't contested. But then C, and most importantly, that there's a pull effect that leads to a 20.6% increase in cropland abandonment. They extend a couple responses. First, that it increases growth. But then remember that we tell you that China's increased growth only happened because they were
rapidly urbanizing, but then secondly, in the United States, it won't actually stop in these rural areas, which means the farms will get all of the harms and none of the benefits. It's going to lead to a terrible, devastating consequences that's going to push 2.3 billion people off the brink into starvation. Then on our argument about the economy, they tell you, oh, look to the specific evidence. A, their evidence isn't specific because, like Daniel tells you, the transportation industry spans across a lot of sectors, but then B, and most importantly, ours is more recent, so it's more indicative of the current job market, and it's more specific in how much of a shortage there is. We tell you specifically, NAM tells you that there's 2.6 million more jobs than people in the manufacturing industry, and ABC tells you that there's 650,000 more jobs than people in the construction industry. This means that, again, even if you want to build it, you can, but if you do, the only way you're going to be able to is by paying extremely high wages, which then leads to a recession and plunges hundreds of millions of people into poverty. Briefly on their arguments, on mega regions, they don't respond to the fact that poor people can't ride it, and then on freight, they don't respond that it physically can't be used. Remember that A, the high-speed rail will never be built because they don't properly respond to our overview, but then B, and most importantly, even if it does, it's just going to lead in exorbitant amounts of starvation as well as a recession that will plunge 100 millions of people into poverty. Daniel and I have never been prouder to negate. Thank you.
Good job. All right.
Good round. Good round.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.